So much to talk about. Oh, my God, the country we live in. I'm not going to mess around and lay it out. I'm going to introduce our first guest today, a legend, a man who says as it is. I nearly got that right. Richard Tice, Deputy to Reform UK. How are you?
Well, I'm all right. I mean, it's slightly driving us mad in this this strange sort of place that we now live in that is out of touch with reality. Essentially formulated by this report that came out yesterday, leaked this report on extremism that I asked the Minister in the House of Commons this morning. So if we just go back a step. So last August, the Home Secretary,
Yvette
Cooper, ordered a report into the current state of extremism in this country.
Of which we know there is loads.
Straight after the Southport horrors. And the report has been produced and it was leaked. And with the leak, the report was so extraordinary, I'll come on to the detail, that immediately the Home Secretary disowned the 38 recommendations in the report prepared for her by her own officials.
Hold on a second. She ignored it after she'd read it, after it had been leaked, or what?
After it had been leaked.
Interesting.
So, this is utterly extraordinary. So I
Troublemaking Tice.
I asked a question in the House of Commons this morning. I said, well, given that it was produced on the Home Secretary's orders...
By her own officials.
By her own people, and given that she immediately basically dissed it and disowned it, presumably that means that the people who produced it in her office are completely out of touch with her wishes and the expectations and wishes of the British people.
And here's a question for you. Did the people in her office leak it when they realised that she didn't want to implement it? Is that what we imagine happened?
No, I think that probably there's a rare good soul deep down somewhere in the bowels of the Home Office.
No, there can't be.
I think there is. No, I think there is.
There's one.
There could be a mole, could be a spy.
Yes.
There could be a right-wing spy in the Home Office. That would be a rarity. Who said, this is ridiculous, we need to get this out there. So it was leaked to a think tank.
And just for everybody tuning in, it's really, really simple. Anybody with a brain cell has seen example after example of two-tier policing in the United Kingdom in the last 8-9 months. I'll give you the example that Reform were very strong, which of course was the Manchester bombings, the Manchester airport attack, the two Muslim gentlemen being attacked, kicking the heads of the policemen and vice versa. We saw all of that. It's in trial, so we have to be careful with specifics. But for months, we sat here and we talked about how the police were rightly suspended. The videos were absolutely horrific. But these two gentlemen, nothing happened. The Crown Prosecution Service didn't bring any charges. It went on months and months to the point where Reform's MPs came forward and said, you need to do something. An absolute example of two-tier policing. Bill in Romsey says, good afternoon to Richard Tice. As two-tier policing, I do believe it's true. I'm an extremist and I'm happy to be one.
That's it.
That's it.
So what this report said was that, and this report was supposed to go into sort of the terrorism extremism, because that's really what most people focus on. And by the way, since 1999, I think until 2021 or something, 96% of all terrorist incidents and deaths were by Islamist extremists. 96%.
But that's not made up or thrown out. That's a fact.
Statistic in the own report. And yet, the recommendation from this report was that actually you should downplay Islamist extremism rather than focus on the ideology of that. You should focus on behaviour. So anybody who talks about two-tier policing is pushing a far-right narrative.
That's what the report says.
That's what the report says. Literally, it says that.
Wow.
If you're and I'm not, obviously, but if you are a environmentalist protester, then you might also be an extremist, and therefore you should be considered in the same way as an Islamist terrorist. I mean, this stuff is absolutely bonkers.
And this is the Home Office.
This is the Home Office. They recommend that the police should spend more time focusing on non-crime hate incidents, despite the lunacy that was exposed by the Alison Pearson saga before Christmas. And actually, everybody sensible and sane with any iota of common sense in their head saying just scrap the whole wretched lot of them.
Do me a favour and people listening, right? So we've got an argument whereby the boss of the Home Office, Yvette Cooper, said we need to deal with, in the aftermath of Southport, extreme terrorism. Her officials have come back and their whole dossier centres on one thing, which is downplay it because those are just the rantings of the right. The people on talk, the people in reform, all those dodgy people, that's their rantings. But at the same time, saying that non-crime hate incidents. Now, I need explaining what a non-crime... What the hell does that mean?
It's a hurty word on social media that might offend a woke lefty-lovey.
Sorry, people, talking to you out there in drive time land. So we're not going to deal with extremists, whether they're Muslims or not, or Islamists who blow people up or stab people to death, because let's downplay that. But we are going to arrest and jail somebody who puts a hurty word online.
Yep.
0344, you know the number by now. Come on, Richard Tice is here. 0344 499 1000. Text to 87222. Start your message with the word talk. The world's gone nuts, man.
Completely nuts. Well, particularly in the Home Office, which, I mean, frankly, some things are just not fit for purpose.
Yep.
And this report is not fit for purpose. The whole team of people, heaven knows how many people produced it and how many hours. But I mean, it's not even worth the loo paper that it's probably printed on or typed on.
Was it Yvette Cooper who faced you this morning, or
it wasn't actually? No, it was one of her team.
Be interesting, wouldn't it, if she's turned down what the dossier, what the report suggests she should do? She presumably would have no confidence in the people who wrote it. Now, today in America, we've seen some very interesting sort of extension of what Trump is doing. Love him or loathe him, he said, I'm going to deal with migration. There are going to be raids, migration centres across 3 American cities every week for the next few weeks. He's discovered that officials, we call them the blob over here, have actually been actively seeking to not carry out what he's told them. So he sacked them all, which is absolutely spot on right, because he's the president. So has Yvette Cooper got the courage to sack the very people that are going against what she asked for?
Well,
no.
The truth is that I don't think that she would have. And that was the second part of the question that I wanted to ask, but you're in a very short time frame to ask a question. But I mean, that is the question. If they're so out of touch, then why are they still there? Because they clearly don't understand what they've been asked to do. They don't understand the core essence of extremist ideologies and terrorism that was the original request. And what was very strange was the minister tried to infer, and I need to be careful what I suggest here, tried to infer that this report wasn't commissioned after the Southport horror, but was actually an ongoing report that was going to be done anyway. And I'm afraid I find that very hard to believe.
Whether it was an ongoing report or it was absolutely asked for after Southport, the fact remains what she wanted was delivered to her, wasn't delivered to her, which says to me that there was a good story. I say a good story, something about a year ago, which I constantly made reference to, which was when Rwanda, and I wasn't a fan of Rwanda, I'm just being perfectly honest,
nor was I.
In any which way. But I remember the ludicrous scenario of about a year ago where Home Office officials whose salaries our tax pays for were suing the Conservative government. They were going to court with our money, taxpayers' money, to actually say to the government, we don't agree with your policy. Now, where I come from, a democratically elected government can do what it damn well wants. I don't like Labour, I didn't like the Tories at the end, but they have a right to do that. So we're paying officials who are using taxpayers' money on top of that to say to a government, I know we work for you, but we don't like it. This is why, this is surely another example about how the blob, the Home Office, all these sorts of people are the majority of the problem in this country. Somebody told me the other day that when the government changes, 200 people lose their jobs, 100 special advisors and 100 ministers, and the blob stay, the blob with their agenda.
And interestingly, actually, the Prime Minister said recently that he's finding that the blob is getting in the way of them delivering their agenda. And that's a recognition that basically it's an immovable thing. We've actually got to reform the whole way the civil service works. And in my view, for example, we should copy the American system where a new Secretary of State in a department at the beginning of a parliamentary term brings in 20 or 30 successful people from the private sector to run the department and to kick some backsides and to make some stuff happen, to roll your sleeves up. And if people don't like it, in the nicest possible way, go and get a job elsewhere.
I completely
agree. Plenty of jobs
agree.
out of there. But if you don't like it, frankly, clear off. We're done with you. the British people elected a government to do a job, and if you don't like it, go and do something else.
I presume that when Reform forms a government in this country, in your mind, the blob is an issue because
it's a major issue. But
it's a major issue.
We will just be much tougher at dealing with it because we've just got much more experience about it, and it will be a focus on getting stuff done as opposed to the sort of power-hungry nonsense that we saw from the Tories, who were more interested in climbing up the greasy pole than actually making stuff happen. And that's the ultimate failure. They relied on the blob, and the blob completely legged them over.
Again and again. Listen, I want to hear from you guys. So much to talk about. 0344 499 1000 is the telephone number. Text to 87222. Figures out today. So much of what's going on in this country, although I listened to an interview over the weekend where somebody said you're so wrong to blame what's happening in the United Kingdom on migration. We need migrants to fill the jobs that the unemployed in Britain won't do. That sends me through the roof, by the way.
Me too.
I wouldn't give them, not the mentally ill and the disabled, but I would not be giving the hundreds of thousands of people who have got to a point where they live on the dole and have no desire or anything at all to get a job.
You mean millions of people?
Thank you. I would make them, in return for the money we give them, do something back to give back. That's exactly what I would do. But migration has caused problems with uproar. It's caused with crimes. It's caused terrible things. Today we discovered that migration will push Britain's population to an astonishing 72.5 million in the next 7 years. Official figures releasing that, and yet nobody seems to understand, although perhaps more so now, if this doesn't get dealt with Trump-esque wise, in my humble opinion, this is out of control.
Well, that's the official number. The truth is, I actually think the current population of the UK is over 70 million.
Do you? What do they say it is? 67?
I think they say it's about 68 and a half.
Oh, right, OK.
68 and 3/4, approaching 69. If you look at metrics from supermarkets on how much food we eat, the population is somewhat bigger. Now, that could be a skewed metric. We may all be a bit overweight, but I think there's probably some truth to it. And so the reality is that if you just look at the evidence, in the 1980s, when we had almost zero net migration, guess what? The economy grew faster at between 2.5% and 3.5% every single year. We all got richer. We all prospered. And if you worked hard, and the place worked. And so I actually think that you actually need to restrict the supply of labour, because then one of two things happens. Either the price of labour goes up, or if employers say we can't afford the labour, then we invest in capital equipment to replace the labour, which is how the combine harvester was invented 200 years ago, for heaven's sake.
I'm so with you. We've got a government who think that small businesses don't create growth. Their idea of growth is for the state to control stuff. You don't even get me on what I spent yesterday afternoon on with that idiot Millipede, the green agenda. But you're right. We have a country that is creaking. And people hate this. They go, oh, it's inflammatory language. No, it's creaking for many reasons. Its public services are creaking because they're overrun, and we cannot afford. Somebody said to me at the weekend, all you lot ever talk about is she paid her stamp for 50 years and she can't get a doctor's appointment. Well, for people in politics, and you are one who listens, Beryl in Rochdale, as I always call her, can't see the doctor, but if you come in on a boat, you get a hotel and you'll get a private GP in 24 hours. That is morally wrong, and I think the British people have got to the point, which is why I think reform, is being listened to. They've got to a point, the British people, where they think, I have a right to say no. I'm not a racist or a bigot or a right-wing extremist. I'm somebody who's played the game correctly all my life, and I feel like I'm being taken advantage of, laughed at, not treated properly. And I think people have a right to speak when that happens. I really do.
Absolutely right. But the reality is that the public services are creaking not through a lack of money, but because of a over-demand, because the population...
Older population, bigger population.
The population has grown way faster than anybody predicted, and I think if it's grown even faster than actually official numbers show, guess what? The demand goes through the roof, whether it's for dentists, doctors, houses, GP appointments, hospital beds, hospital appointments, and so the list goes on. Roads, public transport, it's all creaking because the demand was much greater than was ever forecast.
It's really interesting. In the last couple of weeks, I've spoken to Nigel on the show, you on the show, Rupert Lowe on the show, and you all say one very similar thing, which is that you have all been successful businessmen away from Parliament. And when you look at, you know, there were conviction politicians like Thatcher and like Blair, OK? There were people who had come in from, on the Tory side, from a privileged background. But this is a business, the United Kingdom, and I'm not a fan at all of Starmer. I wasn't a fan of Sunak's. I mean, he inherited his money. We need people, men or women, who will roll up their sleeves, can make decisions that might not be popular, like Trump today, sacking the people who won't do what he says. That's what this country needs. I believe it's I believe it's what this country wants. And on all that political correctness that we get lost in. Yesterday I spent 3 hours talking about how the police are banned from using the word blacklist in case it offends somebody, and yet in London we have the highest knife crime in a major city, I don't think probably anywhere higher in most of the world, and Sadiq Khan gets a knighthood for what? Making sure
he got a knighthood for failure, but here's
a knighthood so that everybody on TfL feels diverse and inclusive. It's rubbish, Richard.
It's completely rubbish. And I know this upsets some people, but I just have to say it. Because we've been around the block, because we've run successful businesses, we know that fundamentally you've got to earn more than you spend when you're running a business. You make profits, you pay tax, you grow, you reinvest. And the same is true, actually. You should use the same dynamics, the same ethics and principle when you're running the country. You should run the country like you run a business. Lean, without waste, efficient, doing a great job, providing a great public services for your customers, which is the population.
Could Reform get past the blob to do that if they were ever elected?
You've got to be absolutely blunt about it, in the same way that President Trump, and he's doing us actually a great favour. I think him and his administration, because they are guiding the way, they are shining the light, I believe, on what needs to be done. And I think you'll see in America even higher rates of growth, and people will say, oh, I like that. What are they doing over there? Oh, they got rid of the blob. They drill baby drilled. They've got cheap energy. They cut daft taxes. They cut daft regulations. And they're off to the races, growing fast and fast. And that's what we need here. And we're not going to get it. I mean, we are spending way more than we're earning as a nation.
Explain something to me then, right? So I don't consider myself supremely intelligent, but even I can look at what Trump was doing. I've said this and think that makes sense. That's common sense. He described it as such. I believe that the British people have never been more sure, actually, of what they know is needed. Why don't politicians in the two main parties, hear me out, take a leaf out of Trump's book or even Reform's book and listen to the people before their parties are decimated? I mean, genuinely.
Well, because the current Labour Party is full of deep socialists. I mean, I'm actually genuinely quite shocked how socialist they are.
I'm not.
They are way to the left of
You're shocked by how left-wing they are?
No, but it's a deep ideological socialism.
He never said anything, and you know this, in all of those years. It was the Ming Vase thing. The Tories cut their own throats.
So that's the Labour Party.
Definitely a massive socialist.
The problem with the Conservative Party is that 2/3 of them basically are wibbly-wobbly Liberal Democrats.
Yeah.
And they don't believe in real conservative values. And I just come back to this key point. We as a nation, we cannot keep spending more than we're earning. Otherwise, we are heading towards a major financial crisis called bankruptcy.
Yep.
And if we don't, the bond markets, they are tense. They are watching us, and people might say it's settled down after the first couple of weeks of this year. You wait, and at some point there is going to be a proper crisis in this parliamentary term of the next 4 years, because the numbers are awful. I've looked at it very, very closely, as have my advisors, and I think the two main parties have no idea the trouble that's coming down the tracks.
I mean, somebody phoned up the other day and said, with everything that Miliband's doing, this person said, I can see power outages next winter. I think this country is, I think you're right.
We were within a whisker about 2 weeks ago. I think it was a Wednesday 2 weeks ago, where we were very close to a blackout, and the Department for Energy and Net Zero and the National Grid said, no, nothing to see here, it's fine. But actually, an independent expert consultant, Catherine Porter, has confirmed we were within a whisker. And now there is panic going on because they looked at her calculations and they thought, bother. Actually, Catherine's right. We were wrong. We need to examine what on earth we've got wrong.
You're very, very good. One final thing before you go. Just Stop Oil stormed the West End stage last night and stopped a performance. Just Stop Oil are, in fact, terrorists, aren't they, under this bill, this report? They're worse than Islamists. Isn't that what you said earlier on?
Well, I mean, essentially, because they are extreme environmentalists, they are now going to be considered, according to this report, that has now been disowned by the Home Secretary, but they would have been considered the same as Islamist extremists that bomb you, that blow you up, that chop your head off. So, I mean, I'm not a fan of Just Stop Oil, but I do think that's taken.
We saw some great footage of them being dragged off the road in Germany. I remember watching the police do that last year and thinking, why are we not like this? So we've got a government that doesn't seem to understand. In fact, we have a government and a main opposition party that doesn't seem to understand what the British people are saying. And it's interesting doing a show like this. You'll know this. More and more people every day are saying that is common sense. This is ludicrous. And reform seems to have, and it's a phrase I used last week, grab the pulse of what the British people are thinking right now, to be fair.
So fundamentally, it's common sense, and it's about who's going to make you better off. And you don't actually have to like the individuals to say, but at the end of the day, they'll make me better off than the other folk.
Amazing. It's always good to have you on.